Okay, this is time to start, and I'm sure more people will join to listen us. First of all, I would like to say hello to all people who are watching, who are listening us. And from now, I'm wishing Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to all of us. As you know, we have two speakers for this 13th ICOMOS UCH webinar. And to have an opening speech, I would like to give floor to Chris.
Thanks, Hakan. I think you've made all the comments I was going to make. You know, Merry Christmas to everybody. I think that's the most important. Good health, just for Christmas, but also the New Year to you and your families. You know, Hakan and I think this is number 13. I think we only had 12 originally planned, and there's still one or two others yet to come. But it's a pleasure to invite to listen to Andy Viduka, who sadly can't be with us due to zone constraints. He lives in Australia, and at the moment I think they're 13 or even 14 hours ahead of my time, and quite poorly timed for Europe. But we'll hear from Andy, and then we'll listen to Carlos Ausejo, who's going to tell us about maritime archaeology and current projects in Peru. Thanks, Hakan. Over to you. Let's share screen and see what Andy has to say.
Okay, first I'm going to read the biography
of course.
The Andy. Dr. Andrew Viduka is a maritime archaeologist and archaeological object conservator employed by Australian government as the Assistant Director Underwater Cultural Heritage. Andy co-drafted the Australian government's Underwater Cultural Heritage Act 2018, which administers LEST Australian Underwater Cultural Heritage Program, and LEST Australia's consideration of ratification of the UNESCO 2001 Convention on the Protection of Underwater Cultural Heritage. Andy is the founder of GIRH's Scientific Diverse Citizen Science Program, and he has a strong research interest in linking community outcomes with the discovery and protection of underwater cultural heritage. Now we are watching the Andy's part. İrem, gösterebilirsin.
Hi, my name is Andy Viduka, and today I'll be talking to you about public engagement, community archaeology and underwater cultural heritage management through the lens of Australia. Before I start that, I'd just like to thank Chris Underwood for his introduction, and I'd also like to thank Hakan Onitz for actually organising this webinar series. Before I start today as well, I'd like to also recognise the traditional owners of the land that I'm presenting from, and that's the Ngunnawal people, and I'd like to recognise their elders past, present, emerging, and I'd also like to recognise any other traditional owners who are listening today through this broadcast. The talk today will go through just a few quick points. I'll give you a very limited background on the legislation, how shipwrecks and then other underwater cultural heritage have been managed in Australia. I'll then quite quickly look at the various public engagement methods that have been used around Australia and narrow down to a conversation around where are we today and what's happening. To give people context, like the rest of the world, post-World War II, divers were very active in the marine environment for the first time, and that initiated a lot of discovery of shipwrecks around the country. Some of the earliest shipwrecks discovered in Australia were old Dutch shipwrecks, pardon me, off the coast of Western Australia, and those wrecks themselves led to a frenzy of looting, effectively, which also then itself led to the first formal legislation in Australia being introduced and the creation of maritime archaeology and maritime archaeology programs in Australia. With that, in 1973, we had the first dedicated piece of legislation to protect maritime archaeology in Australia, which came out in 1973. But sadly, that legislation in itself was quickly challenged because of other legislation being introduced which made it jurisdictionally wrong. So quite quickly from the discovery of the first shipwreck in 1963 through to the introduction of national or Commonwealth legislation, we call it Australian Government Commonwealth legislation, the Historic Shipwrecks Act 1976 was introduced. This legislation built upon the donation of the 4 old Dutch shipwrecks that were found off the coast of Western Australia to the Australian government by the Netherlands. It also built on basically a place management system by individual declaration rather than any other method at the start. Its jurisdictional waters started from along the coastline, the lowest astronomical tide, out to 200 nautical miles. And the actual legislation itself was critically, it was drafted with the idea that there was going to be collaborative administration with the states and the Northern Territory working with the Commonwealth to protect the shipwrecks around the country. Just as a side note, in 1994, the legislation itself was changed so that blanket protection rolling date came in because there was a clear understanding that the ability to individually assess and declare sites was inefficient for the way to manage heritage. In the 1976 legislation, the role of the public was silent, and this also became a glaring problem. Why was it a problem? Well, we initially understood that we would have to work collaboratively with the states and territories from the Commonwealth level to deliver the legislation. Why? Well, you can see here in this image 7,500 shipwrecks geographically distributed around the coastline. But the reality was the ability to access and monitor and manage those sites would be very limited by the number of people employed to actually undertake the work, limited by the amount of funds given to do that. So we have this very geographically spread heritage resource at different depths all around the country, and we already knew this new legislation was going to be protecting all of them, but how effectively was it going to protect? So the legislation itself enabled people to actually dive sites without a permit as long as they didn't act inappropriately, didn't take anything, didn't interfere with the sites. But only 23 sites actually had a requirement for people to apply for a permit to dive them in the first instance. To assist in the national collaborative administration of the Historic Shipwrecks Act, the Historic Shipwrecks program was developed. And that program was effectively the vehicle for dispersing money to the states and territories to undertake some delegated duties. But it also came with an opportunity to redraft what the objectives are, not just limited by the delegated duties from the legislation itself, but to include broader objectives. And here you see in orange that those objectives basically went to help develop an informed and engaged public and to include the public in the process of undertaking fieldwork. It also gave that focus of working with the community. So by 1983, quite quickly from 1976, there was already within publicly available documents a clear understanding that the public were required to be involved to help to get better management outcomes for the heritage. Legislation itself, therefore, and the Shipwrecks program became a fulcrum and the balance of public engagement and site management. And that's that tension here of appropriate access and compliance and enforcement is echoed throughout the whole of the management cycle in Australia. Supporting what we call the senior maritime archaeologist in each jurisdiction, which is the practitioner, supporting the practitioner in understanding how to undertake their tasks and how to work with the community. 2 documents were again produced, which were public-facing documents, and that's the Guidelines for the Management of Australia's Shipwrecks in 1994, and then 2 years later, the Public Access Guidelines. Between these 2 documents, it effectively mapped out for the management agencies around Australia how they should approach engaging the public, how they should actually build what was called maritime archaeological associations, foster that relationship, and also gave guidance to the community itself about what they could expect and how they could participate in working with shipwrecks, what they could do. And in these early days, everything was on the table. You could actually go and undertake activities, including excavation. It is only more recently that we've actually put in place requirements for people who are going to undertake work to actually have their research plan, the ability to conserve the material, the ability to collect things. So management groups of volunteers today have pivoted towards more survey and discovery activities. But let's look at some of those groups. So within the long history of Australia's community engagement, support for avocational maritime archaeological associations was a key strategy to build that public support for management agencies, but also greater awareness in the community. All the other types of strategies, and I'm sure everyone out there has seen a whole plethora of these being done in different countries in slightly different ways, but they were also done here in Australia, and you're seeing wreck trails being installed, displays and signage either installed near the site or on the site itself. You've got community-based interactive programs, online databases so the public can search and see information around the sites, and then of course other sort of more dedicated websites for particular sites or shipwreck trails, and we'll look at brochures, posters and that. Another facet in Australia's community engagement has been support in delivery of training and capacity building for the public. A key and overarching not-for-profit group is AIMA. AIMA is an avocational group. It effectively supports research in protection of heritage and research. AIMA's role in Australia is largely one of coordination of certain functions, and particularly direct functions that were given to it through the Historic Shipwrecks program. So because all the states and territories all had a requirement to do education and outreach from the rules, one of the things that we decided to do was actually narrow that down and actually give funding to one organisation who would then do it on a national basis. So rather than everyone trying to come up with small things, we actually gave the money to one group to do it. So AIMA's partially recompensed to conduct 3 exercises for the Historic Shipwrecks program. They run a national conference, they publish a peer-reviewed journal, they publish quarterly newsletters. AIMA also conducts training itself, and that training is through the AIMA NAS program. So Mark Staniforth and Viv Moran modified the NAS training course some years ago, and that was then made available, and so that Part 4 training course is delivered around Australia and New Zealand through that process. So from the 1994 management guidelines, each jurisdiction as it developed, it started to build its own local maritime archaeological association who they could foster people, get people involved, they could work with that group to actually undertake fieldwork activities. Graham Henderson said many years ago that without maritime archaeological associations, and or even the people who eventually joined and made maritime archaeological associations, without them, many of the major projects in Australia would never have started or finished. So the public's involvement was absolutely instrumental from the earliest points of Australia's history in doing fieldwork around the country. Of the maritime archaeological associations that were created, only 2 remained, MAWA and the MAAV. The Maritime Archaeological Association of Victoria is a very successful group. They've been around for a very long time. They're very active. They've discovered numerous sites, and they actually in 1980 they discovered the city of Launceston site, which became a major excavation itself. They're still involved today in a whole range of things, and they work very, very closely with the state regulator, which is Heritage Victoria. Wonderful group of people, but an older demographic now, struggling to get new members, struggling to get young members. Big challenges. Similarly, the only other group that's surviving of those original cohort of maritime archaeological associations is MAWA, which is the West Australian version. MAWA has benefited from having a very active community again, being constantly engaged with the Western Australian Museum and staff. MAWA are involved in a number of projects facilitated by the museum, but also drive many of their own projects and agendas, and that's the 3D mapping project is a classic example, a survey of Swan River. So a very active community group who not only work closely with the museum, but actually work independently of the museum, but supply information again back to the regulator. Other examples of management-led community engagement activities are the standard things that one would imagine. We've had posters to try and promote people to come in. You've had guides which actually talk about an entire region, that actually talk about the shipwreck resource and what people could do. And then you have particular site-based information to help people actually know more about a specific site in a region. Accompanying that, there's other information that goes out there. This is the sort of information that encourages people when they're in the water or to get into the water so that they're a part of that engaged community. So in conjunction with AIMA, we've developed shipwreck photography competitions which have been run. In the case of the interpretive dive slate that you're seeing here, the actual site itself is the Booyah in the Northern Territory. And that's a hard slate that people can take down and help them to orientate around the site and understand the features of the site in real time. So they're great tools. Another example that's within this group is the mooring system that was installed around the Yongala. That itself was installed to assist the site's conservation because the site people were tying off on the site and that was pulling the site apart. By installing the moorings, it stopped that physical damage to the site from boats tying off on it. And then by supplying what's called DAPs, as you can see in the thing, which are diver access points, that allows people to safely leave the surface and go down to the vessel and in a controlled manner. And this is a great feature of this, so improved conservation outcome for the site, improved safety for the diver. So these are other examples of those management-led approaches. A very successful method that's been used a number of times, particularly by myself in Queensland, which is where most dive tourism happens in Australia, is the expert participant model, where you're working with the public to train them in real time out in the boat, and they can be involved in either the survey of a site or just actually getting more information about sites that they're diving on. That model has been used very successfully over a number of years. Another model that we can look at here is the Queensland Historic Shipwreck Survey. This commenced in 2014. It was a way for that management agency to try and encourage the very active diving public to go out and find more of the 1,300 wrecks that exist around Queensland, and then to share that information back with the agency. It's a rallying to the banner sort of approach, and because 7,000 kilometres of coastline, much of it reef, it's simply too much for one or two individuals who work in a management agency to cover. So again, that trying to harness the community and get information back is so critical there. For non-divers, there have also been community-based approaches that have been developed. In this instance, we're looking at the Wreck Spotters program, which was done by New South Wales. It's been run for 10 years. It continues to be taught around New South Wales, and they're getting information from certain members of the public back. So the program is very much an ongoing one, and like any community program, it requires people to constantly be invested into going out, training and engaging the public to deliver it. So from 1994 or pre-1994 onwards, there was a focus on the management agencies initiating community archaeology programs. A facet that's really changed in Australia of recent is the fact that the public are just developing their own maritime archaeology programs without input from heritage management agencies. The two that I would particularly point out as the initial ones were Southern Ocean Exploration and the Sydney Project. Both of these projects we'll just talk about in a second. And another two that have come out in more recent years, RecCheck Inc. and GERT Scientific Diver. I'll talk about GERT in a second, but RecCheck Inc. is another group that we'll flag. The Sydney Project itself, as you can see from the image, Sydney Project and Southern Ocean Exploration both are very technical diving focused. These are people who have got an enormous amount of skills, they're interested in wrecks in deeper waters, and they're happy to go and search for, discover, locate, dive on, document and share that data. And that's very much what these community groups have been doing. And in this top right corner, you can see the Sydney Project's list of sites that they've been involved in, which is absolutely fantastic and a huge asset to a management agency that cannot dive below 30 metres. The Heritage New South Wales has used the information from the Sydney project to create their annual poster, which is out promoting what Heritage New South Wales is doing. Similarly, in Victoria, the Southern Ocean Exploration Group, who predominantly work in the Bass Strait, which is a very tricky body of water to operate in, they've been involved in an enormous number of projects. They've been an enormous boon to Heritage Victoria because of their engagement, active support for that heritage management agency. More recently, a community group I'm involved in, RecCheck. RecCheck's slightly different, certainly not a technical diving group. RecCheck's interested more in remote heritage that's of relevance to Australia. So whether it's remote within Australian context or remote outside of Australian jurisdictional waters. In this instance, we're out surveying wrecks in the Christmas and Cocos Keeling Islands, so they're quite remote and inaccessible to the majority of Australians. The bad news for Maritime Archaeological Association membership is that it's declining. It has been declining for many years. We've lost most of the original Maritime Archaeological Associations, with only 2 still remaining and functioning. Of those associations, certainly speaking for the MAAV, you've got an ageing participant level. Majority of members are male, so we're lacking female participation, and there's not a lot of people coming around to join, and no matter what they're trying, and they are trying to keep the membership going. So whilst they've done this huge amount of incredibly positive work in the past, for some reasons, it's not going to continue on in that manner unless more people come into the project. In 2018, I co-drafted the Underwater Cultural Heritage Act 2018, and in that we were able to take the objective of the Historic Shipwreck Program, where we talked about the need to have community involvement, and we've now put it into the legislation. We've legislated that the public have a right to be involved, the appropriate use and appreciation of underwater cultural heritage. This has got a fantastic objective in itself, in that it clearly gives the public a role in the future in the way we manage underwater cultural heritage in Australia. So where are we today? We've got new legislation, but we still don't know a lot about the shipwreck resource around Australia, submerged aircraft or other underwater cultural heritage. To be a management agency, as you can see, you need to know where things are, you need to know what condition it's in, you need to be able to monitor sites regularly to know of change, whether natural or cultural. So there's a long way for us to go to be able to say that we're effectively managing the resource around Australia. So how big is the challenge? We've got the preference to in situ management starting in 2001. We've got a very wide geographically distributed underwater cultural heritage resource. We've got a requirement to include the public where possible within legislation as well as policy. But we've really only got less than 20 maritime archaeologists who are paid to undertake the detailed examination and documentation of sites to inform underwater cultural heritage management. So you've got to ask yourself, has the approach we've been using, has it really worked? We've documented a few more sites, but do we understand the majority? No, the answer is no. We are seriously lacking in information to make science-based decisions around preservation or management of sites. So do we need to now challenge ourselves and start to think differently? Do we need to actually say, as much as I'd like to dive, do I need to focus my time on facilitating other people to dive and to share with me more information at a much greater level than what we've done to date? And by prioritising a public good conservation approach, is that going to be the best way we're going to achieve better site conservation? In 2018, I created a citizen science project gathering information by recreational and technical scientific divers. Explored the hypothesis, can the public capture data that can inform science-based decision making? In this program, as you can see from the details outlined below, the volunteering profile of the people that participate in GERT is very different to what I was outlining as a problem within maritime archaeological associations. You have a wider demographic, you have different genders. These are things that we're desperately seeking for to reinvigorate the nature of maritime archaeology programs in Australia. One of the things GERT uses is photogrammetry. Photogrammetry is very key as a method to actually to be able to help people collect information in a systematic manner, just for that purpose itself, to render a 3D model, but also it's a powerful tool to actually interpret data around your survey. In here you can see that a site, in this case it's the Rainbow Warrior in New Zealand, has been rendered into a 3D model. There are 10 condition points that have been documented around the site where people will look at each time they go and compare those images. And in this instance you can then load those condition points onto the 3D model, and that any member of the public can go back and look at the 2019 survey, and hopefully they'll be able to see the 2022 survey when it occurs. To assist photogrammetry to occur effectively, we developed a series of plates effectively so that people can actually put them down and accurately create a 3D model by at least putting 3 plates down and knowing the depth of those plates and locations. This slide shows the first photogrammetry captured by a GERT member. It shows that the technique itself can be taught and that people are able to then go and post-process that data and then load that data up into the Sketchfab website. Very successful outcome from Guy Williams. GERT members also could take their information, and as you can see here, the adopted rec page allows you to drill down to sites that have been adopted. You can click on the actual site and access the report at the bottom of that little pop-up banner, and then you are able to see all the qualitative and quantitative information as well as the photographs and other information that the member collected around the site survey. That's available in a different format through PDF. GERT also works on peer-based learning models and fosters and tries to foster tutors in the local state or territory to lead engagement with other people, to do training and to actually help people collect their data and or interpret the data they've collected. We've got some tutors in different places at the moment. One tutor here, John Nauman, he conducted the first GERT training session by a tutor, which was fantastic in South Australia, and that was held at the Flinders University lab where he taught more photogrammetry skills to other people with 14 participants. So a fantastic result. So GERT in itself is very much a different way to approach the engagement of the public. It still works on the principles of no impact monitoring. It borrows from Chris Underwood's idea of the adopted site, which came out through NAS. It's a method that allows for comparative analysis of a location to another location, so this is a very valuable tool. And it actually has a combination of both qualitative and quantitative data, which is underpinned by scaled photos, video, and hopefully photogrammetry if the conditions make it possible. So in summary today, I just quickly talked about the history of where maritime archaeology and public engagement came from and why it's embedded in both legislation and policy here in Australia. The reality is, though, that even with that, we've still got too big a resource, and we need to actually have more people engaged to be able to effectively understand what's happening within that resource. This challenge is even greater at a time of climate change, where change is occurring more quickly than we can imagine. So there is a real need for us to reinvigorate public archaeology and refocus ourselves into that public good conservation approach rather than actually what we have been doing in the past. The good news is that we have been able to demonstrate that members of the public can collect comparable data which can be interpreted to inform decision making in underwater cultural heritage management. So that's a very, very valuable tool for cultural heritage management. We also know that the members of the public are very capable of being able to participate. They have a huge bag of skills that they bring to participation within any group, and that probably the big challenge for the cultural heritage manager in Australia going forward is to take that amazingly diverse group with different skills and try to help them work collaboratively together, but also collaborating with the management agency so we can deliver better protection for underwater cultural heritage and better understanding of what's happening under the water. Thank you very much for listening today. Cheers.
Yes, thanks a lot to Andy for this very nice presentation. Now, Chris is reading the biography of our second colleague.
Thanks, Hakan. Yes, just to reiterate Andy's presentation, very interesting. Perhaps we can have a few questions and answers. I'm quite familiar with what Andy's been doing, so maybe we can have a quick Q&A at the end of Carlos's chat. I'm very, very happy to be able to introduce Carlos. I've known him for long before I actually came to live in South America, and I'm very pleased that he's still active and contributing in his home country. Carlos is an archaeologist and has a master's degree in maritime archaeology. And if I remember rightly, Carlos, that was gained in University College London or London University. His experience includes government work, private consultancy for cultural resource management, and research archaeology both on land and underwater. He is a founding member of the Peruvian Center for Maritime and Underwater Archaeology, abbreviated as CIPAMS, and since 2007 he's been involved in developing underwater archaeology in Peru as Director of Archaeological Projects, as well as organizer and teacher of underwater and maritime courses. Thanks, Carlos. Looking forward to your presentation. It's over to you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Hakan, for this invitation. Let me share my screen. I can't do it. Give me a second. Okay, it is. Okay. Thank you very much to all. I'm going to talk about what is maritime and underwater archaeology in Peru. It has been developing since actually 2006, 2007 in a formal way. I mean, it's been doing some about it by non-archaeologists, but around 2006, they're the first interventions by archaeologists in underwater archaeology. So just to have an scheme of what I'm going to talk about it is, first I'm going to talk about the water bodies and environment that we have in the country. Then just a little bit of the legal framework, which is kind of complicated, so I'm trying to summarize it. Then talking about the interventions before archaeologists, and then later the experiences that we have where archaeologists were in charge of projects. Some about the problems that we are facing, which are a lot like everybody else in the country, and of some opportunities that have arisen regarding these problems. So about the water bodies, we have a long coast. I mean, we have around almost 2,500 kilometers of coast along the Pacific. No, it's really long. It's quite arid. It's mostly desert and the sea, with small strips of valleys. We also have about 22 large islands, but large enough. They are mostly, none of them have water. I mean, potable water or water which is not salt. So they are more related with the accumulation of the feces of birds, seabirds, that accumulate and form this natural fertilizer called guano. That's why during the 19th century, there was a lot of exploitation on these islands. And you can see the picture on the top right of these 19th century ships, vessels collecting this guano that's going to be traded in Europe mainly. We also have the rainforest rivers, huge ones like the Amazonas or other affluents like Marañón or Guayaga, that have their own experiences or their own traditions and the use of these kind of water bodies, mainly canoes. It's the best way to travel in this space. So rivers are the highways in the rainforest of Peru. And on the other hand, we have ultimately the high altitude lakes. The Andes, which is mainly the main body of land in Peru, it's filled with lakes, which they vary in a range between 3,000 to 5,000 meters above the sea level. Some of them have been increasing the water level, and therefore there are a lot of submerged sites on them. We also have some references to these lakes that serve as a place for offerings. So there are also other kind of use of these lakes, not only as underwater sites, but also as offering sites, places, offerings, lakes, where you can find these offerings, similar to what has been found in Puno in recent years. So about the legal framework, we have several laws. No? The Cultural Heritage Law that has been issued, the last one, I mean, the last version of this law was in 2004, and also have a regulation code that was approved in 2006, 2 years apart from it. The most important part of this regulation code is that it has a specific chapter related with underwater cultural heritage. It's chapter 7, and it states that specifically the definition of what is underwater cultural heritage. It used the concept of the UNESCO Convention, although it changed the time. The time in Peru to be considered UCH is 50 years. Not 100 years as stated in the convention. Nevertheless, it's a great advance because before that, it wasn't mentioned at all as a specific issue in the regulations. Although in the law of 2004, there was mention of cultural heritage could be underwater. That's it. In 2014, the regulation for archaeological interventions is a document that states how do we proceed on the field, how we ask for permissions to the Ministry of Culture. You can't do anything related with archaeology in Peru unless you ask for permission to the Ministry of Culture. In 2019, the regulations of the Coast Guard captain ships has been modified, and that's the last version. And it's related with two last documents issued in 2019 and 2020, which is the National Maritime Policy and the National Cultural Policy. The problem with this is that even though they have tried to engage with other bodies of the citizenship, I mean, not only academic and not only from the government itself, it didn't encourage people of the citizenship to give some feedback about these policies stated for the next 10 years. So it's the National Cultural Policy to 2030, both for maritime and cultural heritage. Regarding the National Maritime Policy, I found actually 20 references to underwater cultural heritage. The most important of them, which is really interesting because it doesn't have any mention on the cultural heritage from the Ministry of Culture, it's about the convention of the UNESCO Convention. The maritime policy mentions, it says that there's several bodies of legal framework, international legal framework, that is not, where Peru is not a signatory. In this case, they specifically mention about the UNESCO Convention on Underwater Cultural Heritage. Nevertheless, one of the main objectives they present in this policy is that protection of cultural heritage, underwater cultural heritage. So they identify 2 points. First, the one about that that underwater cultural heritage is under the responsibility of Ministry of Culture. However, the protection of the underwater cultural heritage is responsibility of the Ministry of Defense, in this case, the Peruvian Navy. They identified two main problems in this case. First, you can see on the right a list of problems related with the maritime concept in Peru, but there's two main points that are related with the underwater cultural heritage and maritime for that case. Deterioration of areas with presence of cultural heritage in the marine coastal zone and illegal extraction and destruction of loss of submerged cultural heritage. This is a huge problem, and we are going to talk about it later at the end of this presentation. But however, it's really a really good advance that the Navy itself is recognizing this problem for the national policy, because before this point, it wasn't mentioned at all. So this is a huge change in the policy structure, in the policy that the government is trying to state for the next 10 years. Stating it is good. How they implement it's another problem. So in case of how the Peruvian Navy is going to take charge of this, it's two points that are mentioned. First is how do you exercise the marine policy work and how do you repress illegal activities in the aquatic environment. This is kind of a tradition from the Navy. I don't know, perhaps in other countries it's the same, but it's like the Peruvian Navy always try to fix problems prohibiting things rather than trying to solve the problem that originate the problem in the first place. And the other point that it's arise me a concern is that they authorize the salvage operations of goods, the removal of findings and sunken remains, including those with historical, cultural, and archaeological value, which means that the Peruvian Navy is also giving permission for this kind of activities. However, you also have to have the permission from the Ministry of Culture. This is a duplicity that in sometimes can create problems, and also not only because they sometimes the people that issue the permissions don't know about the permissions that the Ministry of Culture have to give. So this is a gap that it has to be arise as a problem in the policy and the execution of this policy. In the case of the National Cultural Policy for 2030 from the Ministry of Culture, not the Peruvian Navy, we found only 3 mentions for underwater cultural heritage. The first one, you can see on the left, it's highlighted, and it refers as the underwater cultural heritage as an object that can be moved. I mean, a boat can be moved, a ship can be moved, and pottery or textiles or another kind of movable objects. And that is a problem in how we define the cultural heritage in Peru. We define it in 2 kinds of heritage. The thing that we can move, everything that can be stored in a museum, and the thing that we cannot move, like a site, an archaeological site. And in this case, in the cultural policy, they haven't defined really well how the underwater cultural heritage can be inserted, because later, when they talk about the sites, they mention about this type of underwater cultural heritage that can be moved. I mean, a site, not an object. So this is kind of problems, this kind of conceptual problems are important in order to how they are going to apply this policy. In general, what they have identified, or what is how I found this kind of problems in the policy is about that they mention underwater cultural heritage, but they don't mention maritime. So the coast, everything that is in the coast is not, or next to the sea, is not necessarily a maritime, considered as a cultural heritage as maritime. Even though the maritime policy of the Navy mentions the maritime culture as an issue that has to be protected. So there's no talking between the 2 policies. Definitely, when the Navy policy has been issued, it wasn't finished, the cultural heritage one. And they actually mentioned when they say there is no national policy related with underwater cultural heritage. So this is another point that has to be arise at some point. Well, what is the main achievements that the Ministry of Culture has point out for the 2030? It's the specific creation of regulation regarding underwater heritage management. Also, the creation of a cadastre or a database of identified underwater sites. The elaboration of specific guides and protocols for intervention on underwater culture. And also, they mention about the public outreach and the importance of UCH in regarding the protection of it. They also mention the definition. You can see even down here on the right bottom right, and you can see specifically about this 50 years or less that cannot be considered underwater cultural heritage. So it's really short time. In that case, if we go to a ship from the 1980s, the 1970s, it might be considered 1970s. It might be considered as an underwater cultural heritage. Specifically on how we use or apply the archaeology, this regulation of archaeological interventions, it has another kind of problems. I mean, it states a blanket protection, which is good. Specifically, everything can be in Peru considered cultural heritage regarding wherever it is, unless you establish that it's not a cultural heritage. So in that sense, the blanket protection is really good, and it stated everything from since the Constitution up to this kind of regulations, which is states specifically how do you enact or execute an archaeological project. So in that sense, it's really good. The other good point is that any archaeological project has to be run by a licensed archaeologist. If you're not an archaeologist, you cannot touch anything at all. So that's, in a way, is really good. But in another way, everyone which is an advocate archaeologist or an amateur archaeologist cannot do anything. So this is something that later I'm going to talk again, because in underwater archaeology, as Andy mentioned before, it will be really good on have these advocates or amateurs and the citizenship that is interested in this kind of heritage to help us on registry and protecting the sites. However, until 2012, the regulations in archaeology stated that any engineering project have to run a cultural resource management before the works began. That means that a group of archaeologists should be going and do a survey in the area before any project can start. So that was very good. And you're going to say that we have some good experience in that way. However, in 2012, that changed. And it was mainly because political concerns and economic concerns that this take too much time, which we know that it will take time. And they changed that from cultural resource management projects to only overseeing projects, which means that you just have to say, I'm going to do this project. And during the execution of the project should be an archaeologist overseeing the project in case of anything came and could be considered underwater cultural heritage. It's supposedly to be presented as well with a rapid survey of geophysics, a geophysics survey, but actually we don't know exactly how this has been working and how this has been implemented, because at the how the ministry works, you have the what we call the central management, which is Lima, and then you have different regions of Peru, different offices in charge of cultural heritage, but they don't have any specialists in maritime archaeology. So we have people that is authorizing these overseeing projects without the proper training to evaluate how this information is being given to the ministry. And this also, it's a problem because actually, if you present a project for underwater cultural heritage, you don't have to prove necessarily, I mean, it's not demanded, although it can be, it would be best, but it's not demanded, that you have training in underwater cultural heritage. So if any land archaeologist present a project for underwater cultural heritage, there's not necessarily a way from the ministry to say you can't do that. You don't have the training. So it's kind of tricky. The reason that the ministry is not doing this is that this could segregate and discriminate other specialists. That's the way they're explaining why this is being taken in that way. I'm not pretty sure that it's a good way to do it, but that's the way it is. Okay, so before the archaeologists appear in Peru with training and experience, mostly training rather than experience. Experience has been built during these years, but it's been two or three sites. First is the San Martin shipwreck that sank in 1821 during the independence war of Peru, and it sank just in front of Lima. And it was they have a small research from advocates, as far as I know, in the late 1980s. They found the shipwreck. They did some drawings, but they put up a lot of things that were later stored in different places. I mean, not only government facilities, but also houses of people that collected. There was a famous treasure hunter that was involved in this project as well, and they have their own collections. The other one, it's kind of a tricky, is apparently a Dutch shipwreck. We're not sure why they put it the Galleon Hollandaise or the Dutch galleon, but it was found in the south of Peru, close to Arequipa. It is definitely a 18th century or perhaps an early 19th century shipwreck. As far as we know, it has a copper sheeting on the hull. That's the last information that we know. But two or three, one anchor and a couple of cannons were recovered at that time by the Instituto Nacional de Cultura, the National Culture of the National Institute of Culture. At that time, this was during the 2005-2006, and they were put in front of the building to rotten to death. I mean, right now they're inexistent. And the most famous place is this one, which is the Covadonga schooner, or la goleta Covadonga, which is a Chilean ship that was sunk during the conflict with Chile in the late 19th century. And it's been really tricky. It's mostly the Chilean Navy captured a very important ship for us, which was the Huáscar, no? And we sank this ship, the Covadonga. And since then, it's been like a prize for everyone. So a lot of during the years, it has been looted by everyone, even the Navy, who always ran some kind of exercise. At that point of the history, they usually do that. It's the way that they run things. That's actually and in that sense had changed definitely during the last 10 or 15 years. That approach to this vessel, this shipwreck, has changed completely, and now the Navy has a responsibility, and they know better how they're approaching to the underwater cultural heritage. However, older ones, old admirals or vice admirals, always try to have a memorabilia from this shipwreck. Right now, it's a political tool that from time to time it's arise. The last, it's not the actual Minister of Culture, but the last one make an announcement saying that we're going to refloat, we're going to get this bark, this boat, and then we're going to exhibit here. No? Didn't last much, and a lot of especially say this is not the way, and this is not what we should do in this country regarding with this shipwreck. So what about experiences? From 2006, we have the intervention of a couple of actually lawyers, a couple of lawyers that were interested, that were amateur divers and sport divers, and they were, one of them worked for the National Institute of Culture, so he was really keen to protect underwater cultural heritage. I mean, in that sense, they formed this group, a group called IDPCS, which is like Defense Institute for Underwater Cultural Heritage, and they took a NAS course actually with Chris and Lolly, I think in 2004, and when they came back, they make these suggestions to the actual legal framework, which is the one that was issued in 2006. He's the Rolín Acuña is the one who actually introduced this Chapter 7 on underwater cultural heritage. Unfortunately, he some time ago he passed away in an accident, but that was his legacy, and he's the one that actually got into a group of 4 or 5 archaeologists into this first project, which is the one in La Isla San Lorenzo in front of Lima at Caleta Paraíso. It is it's a shipwreck of a floating dock that in the middle of the 19th century had an accident in the first day of use and sank in front of this island. We had an experience there, and actually it was the first one. It's my first experience in underwater cultural heritage. I only took pictures in that project, but since then I looked for more training and went actually to the NAS course in Argentina with, again, Chris and Oli. And after that, I engaged on a cultural resource management in the Puerto de Callao, which is the main port in Peru. We found a lot of modern, actually, it wasn't that old shipwrecks, but we found also infrastructure related with the late 19th century remodelations of the Port of Callao hidden underneath the moles and the port of the Callao. Actually, it has been demolished. No, it's completely new, but still we were able to register some of the leftover of these constructions. And in 2008, there was there's a mistake here. It's not the cultural resource management, but the overseeing project during the dredging of the port for the port development. Then in 2009, another group of archaeologists were involved in the Caleta Paraíso research project that did the same as in Callao, but this time in Marcona in 2009. So as you can see, this is before 2012. So any kind of project that requires engineering and construction was overseen by archaeologists, and there was a cultural resource project before any kind of intervention. The same happened for the next phase of this this port in Callao, and also for the Callao has been divided into north and south. So when the north part of the Callao port was given in concession and redeveloped again, there was another project where we actually found this shipwreck. It was a long section of a hull with copper sheeting. You know, as you can see here, the visibility was awful, so we only could have close-ups of the hull and the copper sheeting, but it's supposedly to be here. We actually set up a protection area around the shipwreck, but I have heard from different people that that area was dredged. And actually, I don't know if the site still exists right now. Later, there was an overseeing of the dredging immediately after the cultural resource management and after the last dredging that I heard where this site has disappeared. And there were some findings, especially anchors and some cannonballs. Later, the Ministry of Culture for a time had an archaeologist which was actually trained in underwater archaeology and make an advancement registering some places, some sites. This is the same sites that are actually mentioned by the National Cultural Policy. And one of them was in Isla Pachacamac, in front of the archaeological site of Pachacamac. This is in Lima. And they found these 19th century remainings related with the exploitation of this guano fertilizer that it has been in these islands. In 2014, in conjunction with the Navy, the Peruvian Navy, we ran an intertidal site, which was named the Baños de Farranco. This is a construction from the 19th century, and it was in use until the mid 20th century. This is the actual structure. It was everything was triggered. The research was triggered actually because the municipality of Barranco, where this place was located, announced that all the remainings like this were going to be removed from the beach, and then so people could be there. So we talked to the Navy and we set up this small project to record all these remainings piles of the structure, finally getting this plan, which is actually specifically the shape of the structure that you saw on the first picture. So in that sense, later it was removed all of this because they were an actual hazard for bathing people or for people who went to this place, and therefore actually it has to be removed for their protection. But still, fortunately, we have all the recording of this. The next year in 2015, there was another project. This time was in a high altitude lake. It was around 4,100 meters above sea level. It's called Laguna Sirinacocha. We found actually structures and architecture that was submerged, principally because there was built a dam, but also there was the rise of the water level because of the melting of the ice glaciers that are around. Conditions for this project were very complicated. It is high, it is cold. Every morning was it's snowy, as you can see. But nevertheless, we were able to find a different kind of architectural features on the water on the lake, and we also have a kind of some offerings that actually I didn't put the picture, but still there are some offerings like pot offerings at the bottom of the lake. The last, you can see there was a gap, but still. There's the last project I've been involved, we were involved as an institution, is the Caleta Cocotea, this Cocotea Cove in Arequipa. We just finished the first field season. It is a 19th century trading port or trading post, perhaps, with a lot of architecture on the side. And we know that it has been used since approximately 10,000 years BP. And there is a continued use of this place and with interactions with the sea, with the resources that are given by the sea in this area. And there's a continuation of the occupation and how they use not only this cove, but other ones that are really close to them. So this is really interesting. We know this is probably related with this apparently Dutch shipwreck that I mentioned before, because we are really close to Matalani. And that kind of relationships are it's the topic that we are talking or we are researching in this project that is going to be transformed into a research program in the following years. I don't want to finish these experiences with the raft building tradition, sorry for the misspelling. And we have the Caballito de Totora, which is the most famous of them, but also we have the rafts that are built in Puno at the Titicaca Lake, which are different in construction. We do have the several different kind of traditions in the raft buildings with Totora. Some of them has been lost. We also have a tradition which is shared with the north of Chile in sea lion skin rafts, which is almost like an inflatable boat with a small structure, which is perfect for this kind of environment. The historical stories tell us that the transport of goods from the ships to the coast were mainly executed by these sea lion skins. And also in the North Coast, we have this, the Palo de Balsa raft. This is a small version. They used to be bigger. You're going to see an older picture at the end. But also, we recently found this kind of raft, but larger, twice or twice the long, in Cocotea, that is actually being used right now by fishermen. So it's really interesting. We didn't know that they were still using, although they don't use anymore the Palo de Balsa that came actually from Ecuador. So what are the problems that we are facing here in Peru? First is an awareness.
Can we finish in 2 minutes, Carlos?
Yes, I'm just finishing, no worries.
Thank you, thank you.
First is an awareness. People, citizenship, the sports divers don't know how to handle this. The second point is poverty. A lot of fishermen, when they don't find anything to fish or shellfish to gather, they came to the shipwrecks. And you get this. This is images that were sent from a diver that I know that usually tells me with other divers find. And he said, hey, Carlos, you know, I just got this. And they're getting a lot of information. We are trying to establish a list of particular points where we can go. And then it's fear, because if they report this, they don't know what they are going to face from the Ministry of Culture or the Peruvian Navy. In the case of academy, the lack of resources is another problem. We don't have much money or funding to do research or do the surveys or geophysics in this and in the areas of interest. You know? Lastly, we have opportunities. Opportunities as what we do with this sport diving people and the fishermen in terms of they can tell us where they're finding these places, these sites. No? And in maritime culture as well, as I mentioned, this is the original raft. And then capacity building. We need more people that know how to handle GCH, especially related with the conservation. We are able to research, to survey, we are able to draw, we are able to do some photogrammetry, we're able to excavate, but we don't know, we don't have much training on conservation of materials. That's it. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Carlos. Yes, Chris.
Yes. Well, last words. I wonder if anybody had any comments or questions for Carlos as he's with us at the moment. It doesn't look like it. Carlos, can I just reflect on a few things? I mean, it was quite interesting for me listening to Andy Viduka on the one hand and yourself. And it's very clear that through the last 30 years or so, and it'd be well known to a number of our people in the audience, how much they've invested in avocational archaeology and realized the benefits and, you know, integrated even them into officially being involved through their legislation. And that's quite the opposite to you, isn't it? It's clearly something that needs to be addressed. And the other thing regarding Peru I see is the continuing influence of the Navy, the Armada. And that's quite clearly common, I think, not just in Latin America, but still in other parts of the world. But also what I found interesting is there is some attempt to bring the two, let's say the Ministry of Culture and the Armada, the Navy, together in some form. But they've managed to, in the process of creating the two, let's say, institutes and legislation, there's some big holes that seems to be uncertainty. And where there's uncertainty, there's opportunity for those that wish to exploit. And but also, you know, as I said earlier, we've known each other for quite a long time now, and I can see the progress that's been made in Peru. And also, I just want to remind people of the fantastic resource. Your opening slide showed the canoes, and then later you've shown the high altitude archaeology, which you brushed over in terms of it being cold and high. But I'm very aware of the actual, you know, the realities of getting equipment, you know, thousands of meters above sea level, the complications that has for diving, and yet you're finding, you know, architectural features, but also offerings. And that's I know from other parts of Latin America, there's great opportunity for discovery and new knowledge, and indigenous knowledge and local knowledge will be revealed. You know, and right the way through to the end, when you showed the reed boats and the balsa rafts, tremendous resource. You know, right the way from underwater, offshore, right the way to the high Andes, and the challenges to manage all of those, as you made very clear, was the necessity for more maritime archaeologists, and you know, taking Andy's points is that you need the public assistance, not just in terms of awareness of the value of all of these things, but participation in some form, because it's an impossible challenge otherwise.
Yes, indeed. I mean, we don't have enough hands to manage all this. And as we have seen the last weeks, where we were going through this road, new road, and watching the sea and seeing and actually seeing how they are where they didn't have before letters constructions that say this is private property. A lot of these places now they have ¿cómo se dice letrero? An ad saying this is a private property. So a lot of people trying to get land and appropriate. And we have been talking with the fishermen in this Cocotea Cove, and they have been having problems with people, because they were saying, no, you cannot go now through this area because this is my property. So they are not allowed to go and fish. So how can be the traditions are starting to get into trouble, no? And this is going to generate also a conflict between the fishermen and the landowners, which in this case it's not a right owner. He's what we call a usurpador de tierras, someone that is actually stealing the land from someone. So that's going to be a problem as well. And the awareness, it's good, but still, I mean, how do you face fishermen that it's not allowed to fish, and there's the climate change is affecting what he's used to fish, what he's used to gather as shellfish or everything else, you know? And then he finds a copper sheeting shipwreck. Well, he's going to take all the copper and sell it as junk. The same happens with cannonballs and cannons, as you saw in the picture that was from the north part of Peru. So it's really complex, and just being in, it has to be addressed at some point.
Yes.
Both by citizenship, but also by the government.
Thanks, Carlos, for that additional challenge you face. Mariano has a question for you. Mariano, would you like to ask Carlos?
Yes, thank you so much, and congratulations, Carlos, for your presentation, and as well for Andy for his previous one. Sorry, I was Carlos. I have a quite tricky point on one of the questions you have addressed in your presentations, and this is due to a similar question I posed some weeks ago in a webinar I assisted. I attended also with Loli on the organized by the Chilean Corporación Marítima. And over that webinar, the question of the fate and legal status of the Cañonero Covadonga, I posed the question on what for Chilean authorities is the legal status of that wreck sunk in 1880 in Peruvian waters. And the same questions, let me pose it to you. What is the legal official legal position of the Peruvian government on the title and property and ownership or anything around the Covadonga? Sorry for being so.
It's quite tricky question, actually. I mean, I will start with my opinion. Okay, my opinion will be that this one. It's a Chilean Navy vessel, yeah, that was sunk by a Peruvian booby trap, and it was sunk. Okay? We never took the boat. There are at least 15 Chilean sailors still in the boat. So for me, it is a Chilean boat, which happens to be in Peruvian waters. There's a trick also here, because Chile, as Peru, have 2,000 miles sovereignty, because we say that, of the sea. Peruvian Navy will defend that as well, and that's why we haven't signed the Convemar. Okay. Still, I believe, and that's my opinion. I stated on a Chilean interview they made for me. They told me some time ago, and I said this is a Chilean boat, which is really different to the other boat, which is the Huáscar, that was captured by the Chileans, and it happened that actually bombarded the Callao port under Chilean sailors. So it's not us. Okay. Now, what do the government say? This is, as far as I know, there's no an official position on the ownership of the shipwreck. Nobody has said anything. There are opinions from minister, admirals, a vice president once, and I think that Chris knows about this because the government approached to him some years ago, saying we want to get this boat out, and he stated a really nice question: is this is the boat that you want to refloat? This is the boat you want to get? So the official position of the government is that they actually don't have an official position yet. It changes in opinion of who is talking, mostly ex-former Navy officers, no? And sometimes a Ministry of Culture that doesn't know necessarily what he's talking about. But
okay,
most opinions in the academic area are saying this is a Chilean boat, leave it there. I will suggest a joint research, of course.
yeah, That's the way to do it.
Yeah.
Because as far as we know, Chilean official position is that they have no official position as well. So it could be a good point after the ICJ ruled the last decision, finally decided on your overlapping maritime zones with Chile to begin to cooperate, and perhaps through a soft agreement only under scientific questions such that.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, Mariano, very excellent question. Excellent question. Very, very nicely articulated in terms of response, with no clear solution, obviously, but plenty of research necessary on that front. I can expect something to read again, Mariano, in the coming months or years on this particular project. But it's amazing how UCH throws up these little interesting, let's say, case studies. Okay, everybody, it's been, again, 2 fascinating talks. Very connected, very different, but showing similar problems and challenges and solutions. It just remains for me to say thanks for joining. Have a great Christmas and a very prosperous New Year. And I think we've certainly got another date in January. Is that correct, Hakan? In terms for another, we have another date. So we'll see you again in a month's time, I guess. Have a great time. Thanks, everybody.